Reincarnation has been discussed for over 1,000 years, and experts like the late Canadian psychiatrist Dr. Ian Stevenson researched the subject and wrote books showing that there was much evidence to prove that reincarnation existed. The following cases are just the tip of the iceberg as to the incredible evidence that exists for the proof of reincarnation. These are 10 reincarnation stories that will open your mind. Number 10. Barbro Karlen. Barbro Karlen was born in Sweden in 1954 into a Christian family and claimed she was Anne Frank in her previous life. As a child, she was aware that she had lived another life as Anne Frank and had vivid dreams and a fear of uniforms, but it was not until she started school that she found out that Anne Frank was famous and decided it was best not to go around claiming she was Anne Frank in a previous life. When she was a child, her parents went on holiday to Europe and visited Holland and Anne Frank's house. When they arrived, Barbara knew the streets and was able to direct her parents to the house. On arriving at the house, she noticed that the original steps were missing, and once inside, she felt terrified. And on entering Anne Frank's bedroom, she noticed that newspaper clippings of movie stars, which she had placed on the walls as Anne Frank, were still there, but when she was about to describe them to her mother, they abruptly vanished in front of her eyes. When her mother made inquiries about the missing pictures, the guy told her they'd been temporarily removed because the tourists were stealing them for souvenirs and would be replaced in frames to protect them. However, for Barbara to be in the building was too emotional and she ran out in tears. She has since written a book about her experience, and with the amount of historical evidence and information she was able to recall, she was even supported by the head of the Anne Frank Foundation. Number 9. Shanti Devi. Shanti Devi was born in India in 1926 and up to the age of 4 had never spoken, and when she did eventually speak, she claimed she was another person who came from Mathura, a village 145 kilometres from where she now lived in Delhi. She could even speak the dialect, and that she had a husband called Kedarnath who was a merchant. She described the town where he came from and how she died giving birth to a son 7 years earlier. It was later proved that Kedarnath did indeed exist, and when word got out, he decided to visit Delhi pretending to be his brother in order to trick her. Shanti immediately recognised him as her previous husband and asked him whether he had kept his promise that he had made on her deathbed. Mahatma Gandhi even showed an interest in the case, and with his promptings, Shanti and her team visited the village of Mathura, where she was able to describe landmarks and was able to guide the team to the home of her previous life and to her husband Kedar's merchant shop. At the shop, Shanti identified her sister, who after talking to her verified that Shanti was her dead sister Lugdi. Shanti knew who all the neighbours were by name and was finally able to meet her son, whom she had died giving birth to. Number 8. Jennifer and Gillian Pollock. Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock were two sisters who were born in Hexham, Northumberland, UK, who in 1957, whilst walking to church, were struck and killed by a car. Over 1 year later, in October 1958, the mother gave birth to twins, who they called Jennifer and Gillian. The parents noticed that the girls shared the same birthmarks and scars as their deceased sisters, and when the parents brought out the box of toys belonging to the previous sisters, they knew the names of the dolls. The girls also shared a fear of cars and had nightmares screaming that the car was coming towards them. When they visited the old playground at the school where they used to play, they knew exactly where everything was located. Number 7. Chase Bowman. Chase Bowman was a young boy who had a fear of loud noises and had always suffered from eczema on his wrist. He was always describing to his mother his experiences in a battle, and reflecting on what he had said appeared to be the American Civil War, where as a black soldier he was shot in the wrist, is patched up in the infirmary, and then sent back out to battle, of which he did not want to return. All he wanted to do was go back to his wife and child. On his return to the battle, he said that he was ordered to stand behind a cannon, where shortly after must have received a direct hit, because Chase then described looking down on the battle scene from on high and feeling relieved to be out of it. Chase was able to draw the battle scene from an aerial perspective, as if he were that dead soldier looking down in spirit. As Chase Bowman, his mother was unable to find a reason for his eczema, yet once he was able to discuss the trauma of his life as a soldier, his eczema cleared. Number 6. Jenny Cockell. Jenny Cockell was born in Northampton, UK, and as a child had regular dreams of living in the 1930s as a young woman in Ireland and being a loving mother to her many children, and drew pictures of her village and the cottages that she'd lived in. Later in life, she underwent hypnosis and was regressed back to the 1930s, where she found she had actually lived as a young mother called Mary Sutton, who had many children. She also found that she'd had a violent husband, and unfortunately, Mary Sutton died young at the age of 32, whilst her children were still very young. Jenny decided to visit the village near Dublin and found she was familiar with all the surroundings and was able to find in the local records that Mary Sutton did exist, along with the names of the children. She was able to contact the eldest son, called Sonny Sutton, who was now an elderly man, and he was amazed that she could describe memories from his childhood. Jenny was able to bring all the family together, as they'd never seen each other since being separated after their mother's death. At the family reunion, Jenny spoke about her memories of their life in Ireland, where she was able to convince them that she was indeed their mother back in Ireland in the 1930s. It appears that even being reborn as Jenny Cockell, Mary Sutton after death still needed to know that her children were all safe and had survived, and was able to bring them back together even though they were all now elderly people. Number 5. Mandy Seabrook. At 2.5, Mandy asked her mother why did she cry at her funeral. This was just the beginning of a series of questions that led her mother to believe that her daughter, in her previous life, had been her sister called Mandy Clark, who had died as a child. Mandy Seabrook told her mother that she appeared at the funeral as a spirit and observed all of the mourners. A bull that had been placed in the coffin that at the time her mother was unaware of was later confirmed by a relative. Mandy Seabrook said that it had been raining on the day of her funeral and the ground had been muddy, and she was able to describe how her mother as a child had slipped and nearly fell in. The family were now living in north of England, and when they came down to visit London, Mandy Seabrook mentioned to her mother as they were going past the cemetery that was where in her previous life as Mandy Clark she was buried. They decided to stop at the cemetery where Mandy Seabrook was able to find a grave, even though it did not have a name on it, but was later confirmed as the grave of Mandy Clark. Number 4. Helen Pickering. In Sydney, Australia in the 1980s, an Australian housewife called Helen Pickering was hypnotised by a psychologist called Peter Ramster, who regressed her back to Blairgowrie, Scotland in the 1870s, where she had practiced as a doctor called James Burns. Under hypnosis, she was able to describe in a Scottish accent the town, the pub she drank, and the area where she practiced as Dr. James Burns. The latter checked archives and other old records and proved that a Dr. James Archibald Burns did practice in the town. Helen and the psychologist then took the long journey from Sydney to Scotland to verify what had been said under regression. There they met two people, an historian and a reporter, where they visited the old College of Medicine called Marshall College in Aberdeen, where she claimed she had studied as a young male student in the 1830s. Helen had accurately drafted an outline of how she remembered the building and described in detail how it looked in the 1830s, even though 150 years later there had been many alterations. Helen was able to describe to an historian at the college details of the building which he claims she could not possibly have known, as the old drawings he had taken out of the archives had never been released to the public. Was this actual proof that Helen Pickering had indeed attended the college as James Burns in the 1830s? Number 3. Gwen Macdonald. Gwen Macdonald was an Australian housewife who was hypnotised by psychologist Peter Ramster. Gwen had been regressed back to the 1770s in Somerset, England, where she had lived as a young woman by the name of Rose Duncan. Gwen had never been to England, and when she was regressed, she was able to describe in detail various landmarks and especially a tavern which was called the Pilgrim's Inn. They later flew from Sydney to England to verify Gwen's claims, that she'd lived as Rose Duncan in the late 18th century. The first place they visited was the tavern which Gwen had described, which was now called the George and Pilgrim. However, in 1792, it was called the Pilgrim's Inn. This was an amazing similarity. Under hypnosis, Gwen had mentioned names and places around Somerset which could not be located on any current maps. However, when they checked maps from the late 18th century, the names had indeed existed in that period. Gwen had also described the cottage where she had lived in, and in this cottage was a stoned floor where the tiles had been stolen from Glastonbury Abbey. On the stones were unique markings, and Gwen, under hypnosis, was able to draw the markings. When they visited Somerset and its surroundings, Gwen was not only familiar with the area, she was also able to direct them to the cottage, which was now known as Rose Cottage, and records showed that it had been occupied in the 1700s by a family called Duncan. The stone floor in the cottage had been encrusted by centuries of dirt, and when they cleared the floor they found the markings that Gwen had described and accurately drawn when she was under hypnosis. Fortunately, Gwen has since died, and we ask the question, where is she and who is she now? Number 2. Peter Hulme. Peter was born in Birmingham and was hypnotised by his brother Bob, who was an amateur hypnotist, and his brother was able to regress Peter back to the English Civil War in the 17th century, where he was a foot soldier called John Raphael forced to fight in Oliver Cromwell's army. Peter and his brother then visited sites and battlefields that had described under hypnosis, and were able to locate military artefacts buried in the ground that were from the Civil War. Peter then described the church in Comstock, Devonshire, and drew a picture which they sent to a local historian. The picture that Peter drew on hypnosis showed a tree growing out of a tower with a spire inside. The historian was able to locate the church, but was now missing the spire. The historian said there was still a tree growing out of the tower, and that there had been a spire inside the church, but the spire had been removed in 1776. In Comstock, they were able to check historical records and located a John Raphael who had married an Elizabeth Bishop after the war in 1653. Peter, under hypnosis, would name a village called Alcott, where it had been treated for injuries. It has since been renamed Alvescott. Number 1. James Leininger. James was a young boy from Louisiana who told his parents that in a previous life he was a pilot in World War II. As a young child, he had a fascination and a strange familiarity with fighter planes from World War II. At only 2 years of age, he had a knowledge of parts of planes that no child his age could possibly have known. He had regular nightmares of being trapped inside a burning plane and was able to draw vivid pictures of planes and warships and overall battle scenes. He claimed that he was shot down by the Japanese, and the plane he flew was a Corsair. He even knew the name of the ship he served in, called the Natoma, even the names of some of the crew members, and when they checked the records of their names, they proved to be factual. It appears that in his previous life, he was a fighter pilot in World War II called James Houston, who was shot down in a Corsair. The most amazing fact was at the age of 3, he attended a reunion of the crew of the Natoma. He named and recognised some of the crew. When he met Houston's family, he was able to describe events of James Houston's childhood. James Houston's elderly sister was so amazed of how much knowledge he had of her family and of their childhood, she had to agree he was her dead brother, reborn as a young boy, now called James Leininger. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. There is so much evidence for the proof of reincarnation that it is really mind-boggling. Reincarnation does not appear to give us any answers about the meaning of life, but certainly leaves us with many questions. To some people, the thought of reincarnation is comforting, but to others, it's as if existence is one huge treadmill that we cannot seem to get off of. We all like to believe that if you commit horrific sins in this life, you will be punished. And if you have been a good person, you will be rewarded. But there appears to be no evidence of this, and we are left none the wiser. The following are 4 more incredible reincarnation stories told by ordinary people leading ordinary lives. Number 4. John McConnell, United States. John was a retired police officer who had been very close to his family and had frequently told his daughter Doreen, "No matter what happens, I will always take care of you." In 1992, he worked as a security guard, and one night after finishing his shift, stopped at an electronics store and saw 2 men robbing it and pulled out his gun. One of the thieves behind the counter shot at John, and he was hit 6 times. The bullets had sliced through his left lung, his heart, and a main artery. He later died. 5 years after John died, Doreen gave birth to a son she called William. Unfortunately, William was born with serious heart and lung issues and had to undergo surgery. William was born with birth defects very similar to the fatal wounds suffered by his grandfather. When William was old enough, he began talking about his grandfather's life. When he was 3 years old, his mother was trying to work quietly in her study, and William was misbehaving. She told him, "Behave or I will spank you." William replied, "Mum, when you were a little girl and I was your daddy, you were naughty and I never hit you." Later, William began to talk more about the life of his grandfather, and Doreen felt strangely comforted by the idea that her father had returned to take care of her just as he said he would. William then started to talk about his death in his last life and said that people were shooting during the incident. Another time, William said to his mother, "When you were a little girl and I was your daddy, what was my cat's name?" And she replied, "You mean Maniac? No, not that one, the white one." "Oh, you mean Boston," his mother said. "Yeah," William said. "I used to call him Boss, right?" Well, that was correct. The family had 2 cats named Maniac and Boston, and only her father referred to the white one as Boss. On another occasion, his mother asked William if he remembered anything about the time before he was born. He said that he died on a Thursday and went to heaven, and that he saw animals there and also talked to God. He said, "I told God I was ready to come back, and I got born on a Tuesday." Doreen was amazed, as he had yet to learn about days of the week. Doreen started to notice other similarities between her father and William, where they both loved books, and when they visited William's grandmother, he would spend hours looking at books in his grandfather's study, and he even had his grandfather's mannerisms. William was also good at putting things together and could talk non-stop, just like his grandfather. But William especially reminded Doreen of her father when he tells her, "Don't worry, Mum, I'll take care of you." William would often talk about the period between lives and told his mother, "When you die, you don't go right to heaven, you go to different levels." He said that animals are reborn as well as humans, and that animals he saw in heaven did not bite or scratch. Although Doreen's father had been a practicing Catholic, he believed in reincarnation and said that he would like to take care of animals in his next life. William said that when he grows up, he will be an animal doctor and will take care of large animals at a zoo. Number 3. Hanan Mansour, Lebanon. Hanan was born in Lebanon in the 1930s. When she was 20, she married Farouk Mansour, who came from a wealthy Lebanese family. The couple had 2 daughters named Leila and Galada. Shortly after having a second daughter, Hanan developed a heart problem, and her doctors advised her not to have any more children. However, she did not heed the doctor's warning and had a 3rd child, a son, in 1962. In 1963, Hanan's health started to deteriorate and she started to talk about dying. Hanan's husband Farouk said that Hanan told them that she was going to be reincarnated. This was 2 years before her death. When she was 36, Hanan travelled to Richmond, Virginia to have heart surgery. She tried to telephone her daughter Leila before the operation but couldn't get through. Hanan died of complications the day after surgery. 10 days after Hanan died, a child called Suzanne Garnham was born. Suzanne's mother told Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia and an authority on reincarnation, that shortly before Suzanne's birth, she dreamed she was going to have a baby girl. She said that she'd met a woman and we kissed and hugged. He said the woman was about 40 and said, "I am going to come to you." Later, when she saw Hanan's picture, she thought it looked identical to the woman in her dream. Suzanne's mother went on to give birth to a baby girl. One day when Suzanne was only 18 months of age, she picked up the phone and said over and over, "Hello Leila, hello Leila," again and again. The family had no idea who Leila was. As Suzanne got older, she was able to explain that Leila was one of her children in her previous life, and she was not Suzanne, but Hanan. The family asked, "Who is Hanan?" Suzanne replied, "I am still too young, but when I am older, I will tell you." As she got older, she was able to name her children in her previous life, and the name of her husband, Farouk. She was also able to name her parents, her brothers, and even 13 names of her relatives in that previous life. Suzanne's parents decided to try and locate their daughter's past life family. Inquiries were then made in the town where the Mansours lived. However, word had got around where the Mansours had heard about the case and decided to visit Suzanne and her family. The Mansours were initially skeptical about the girl's claims, but became believers when Suzanne identified all of Hanan's relatives and accurately named them. Suzanne also told them that prior to her heart surgery, Hanan had given her jewels to her brother Hercule in Virginia, and that Hanan instructed her brother to divide the jewellery among her daughters. This was later verified. When Suzanne was 5, she would call Farouk 3 times a day, and when her family visited the Mansours, Suzanne would sit on Farouk's lap and rest her head against his chest. Even when she was 25 years of age, Suzanne would still telephone Farouk. Number 2. Kendra Carter, United States. Kendra lived in Florida, and when she was 4 years old, her mother took her to her first swimming lesson. When Kendra met her swimming instructor, she immediately jumped into the instructor's lap and started acting lovingly towards her. Kendra then developed a loving attachment to the swimming instructor named Ginger. The child then talked about Ginger all the time, and then began saying that she'd been a baby in Ginger's tummy. Kendra's mother eventually found out from Ginger that she'd had an abortion 9 years before Kendra was born, when she was unmarried, sick, and dealing with anorexia. Kendra was usually a withdrawn child, but every time she saw Ginger, she was bubbly and happy. Time was set aside for them to be together because Kendra's wish to be with Ginger had become very intense. Then her mother and Ginger had a falling out, and Kendra was unable to visit Ginger. Because of this, Kendra would not eat, slept a lot, and became depressed. After 4 months, Kendra was able to visit Ginger again, and she quickly recovered. Kendra's mother decided to buy a book about reincarnation to find out more about her daughter's strange behaviour, but she also felt uneasy and guilty about buying the book as it went against all of her beliefs of a conservative Christian church, which did not accept the idea that reincarnation was a natural process in life. It's strange that a child believed she had once lived before, though a very short life, yet her mother had no such beliefs due to her religious upbringing, so it is obvious that Kendra's belief was definitely not influenced by her mother. So where did Kendra get her beliefs from, as she appears to have been born with them? How did Kendra remember this past life with her previous mother when she had only existed in her womb for a couple of months before the abortion? Number 1. Diane Williams, Great Britain. Diane's grandmother, Nanny Wyatt, died on the 4th of October, 1974, and for many years she mourned her passing. It was not until her third child was born on the 4th of May 1975 that she started to come to terms with her grandmother's death. She called her child Kelly, and when she was 2 years old, was able to recall stories of her mother's childhood that left her totally stunned. One day, Diane's mother, Sister Pam, was visiting and picked up Kelly and placed her on her lap. Kelly then said, "Do you remember when you used to sit on my lap like this?" Diane and her auntie both laughed, believing it was just childhood fantasy. But then the child continued saying, "I used to comb your hair," and described in detail the style that Pam had worn, which was a Cleopatra look of the early 1960s. Other than the hairstyle, where did Kelly learn the name Cleopatra? The 2-year-old then went on to describe the type of dress that she had brought for Pam, which was white with red dots, which again was true. Now Diane and her auntie started to take notice at what Kelly was saying, as she was now describing things from the past that were totally accurate. Diane was now starting to notice her daughter's mannerisms, which were identical to her great-grandmother's. When Kelly sat down in an armchair, she would place her child's handbag on the floor between her leg and the chaired leg, which was exactly as her great-grandmother would regularly do when visiting. As Kelly got older, she started describing in detail the types of Victorian clothing she'd worn in the past, even though she had never seen any pictures. Whenever she spoke about her great-grandmother, it was always in the first person, as if she is there herself, and used phrases that were now out of fashion. On another occasion, she described in detail the house she used to live in, along with the types of furniture. When Kelly's grandmother died, she comforted her mother, saying, "It's okay, she is happy and with her family." She spoke with a maturity and a knowing for someone so young. One day an old friend of Diane's visited and were discussing what happened on a certain date when they were teenagers. Kelly then said, "I know what year it was. It was when we had a plague of ladybirds." Her mother's friend was shocked, asking, "How did she know about the plague of ladybirds?" Then Kelly added that I can even describe what dresses you wore, and then went on to describe the fashion that her mother wore as a teenager in the late 1950s. They then discussed the Falklands War, which was happening at that time, and Kelly again interrupted, saying, "Yeah, it was the same during the last war when lots of bombs were dropped and Birmingham was hit really badly." Kelly was talking about World War II. Diane now believed that her daughter Kelly and her late grandmother Nanny Wyatt are the same person. At age 7, Kelly was very mature for her age and could easily converse with other adults.